Thanks for joining the land we all forgot. Why roadway right-of-way polygons matter for land infrastructure and energy planning. This is a Regrid and Esri co-hosted webinar where we're going to talk about the Regrid's newest product and kind of why it matters to the industry. I want to introduce myself. I am Matthew or Matt Karli. I respond to both. I'll also respond to hey you with the beard. Not a lot of formality on my part. I am the director of product management here at Regrid. I've been in some form or fashion playing and utilizing parcel boundary data for just about 30 years, going back to the mid 1990s when I first started, dealing with hard copy tax maps, for parcels. So that was it's been a long road. I've learned a whole lot about the space. And I'm happy to be here. I'm part of the Regrid team and launching this new and innovative product. I'm joined today by Linda Foster, who is the Director of Land Records and Cadastral Solutions for Esri. And Linda, I'll kick it to you to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Matt, and thank you so much for having me here today. This is such an important topic, and I'm excited to be a part of this. As Matt said, Linda Foster, Director of Land Records and Cadastral Solutions here at Esri. Prior to coming to Esri, I spent about 20 years in the industry, working very extensively in the right-of-way space. I'm a registered land surveyor, and I've also worked very much in the GIS space, leveraging both of those topical areas to advance infrastructure projects and advance right-of-way management. So excited to be here and talk about the work that Regrid's been doing in this area.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for being with us today. Really, I know you've got a depth of experience that we really want to help all the listeners and viewers of the webinar today kind of learn from. So I'll start off. I've got a few questions for you related to kind of the historical context and some of the legacy challenges related to right-of-way. So we'll dive into those and go from there. So the first one I have is within the United States specifically. How have roadway right-of-ways traditionally been documented as part of the parcel cadastre? And how has that affected modern cadastral mapping within the United States as a whole?
So great question. And I think I'll start by just framing land records a bit in the United States and how we talk about them, how we manage them, and how it all kind of stacks up, if you will. So really, you mentioned cadastre. So that's an important word to talk about and maybe set some context around. Really, when we talk about cadastre, it's an official comprehensive record of real property, most often used to support tax assessment. That's where we're most commonly think about it in the United States when we hear the term cadastre. It's that inventory or register of real property so that local communities and local governments can do tax assessments and valuations in support of taxation to collect monies to run their communities. And so where does right-of-way fall into that? Well, land records are what make our cadastres. So each and every parcel that makes up a cadastre, if that part of that registry has a land record that created that parcel, and really rights-of-way are no different. They are there for the purposes of giving us access to properties, access to places we need to go and be, access for utilities, for instance, those corridors. Predominantly, we think about them from a transportation and utility perspective. So when you're on the street driving your car, you're in that street, that's a right-of-way more than likely. And I won't get into the technical and legal details too deeply today, right. But we'll just frame some of that. And so really, traditionally when we think about cadastre in the United States, it's been for taxation purposes. So from a right-of-way standpoint, we don't tax those areas because they're generally used for public use. Now, there's some caveats sometimes to that, depending on how it was legally defined or legally transferred, those types of things. But by and large, generally those areas are for public use. Now there are different types of rights of way. It can be for private use, it can be for public use. So there's a difference there as well. But largely those areas are not taxed, so they've not been part of the cadastre from a taxation standpoint. So where do those records live and what defines the rights of the rights of way? It's those land records. Again, it's documents like deeds, H-lots, H-plats, those types of things that we talk about, all stitched together, again, to make another fabric, but this time a fabric that represents what we like to call the land in between those taxable parcels.
Awesome. No, it's really great, and it's interesting that it hasn't been documented in a way that you would think it had. It's funny because I've been working on this right of way project for over a year at this point, right? And you and I have been talking about it for months and months, even going back to 2024. And so I work at home, I work remote, and my family, you know, I've got an adult daughter, and she's around the house a lot because she works later in the afternoon. But my wife and my daughter were like, "What is that you're talking about the other day? You're talking about like right of way, like right of way. Like, what are you doing? Like they don't know what I do." And they were saying like, don't we know where all that is? Like, and I was like, actually, not as well as you might think that we should. So it's interesting to kind of have that great historical context that you provided. So
Yeah, and
yeah, go ahead.
I think it stems back to you know, the purpose and use. And you know, in the United States, we're very mature from a taxation standpoint, from a land administration standpoint, context
Right.
of managing land records, assessment, valuation, taxation, that are we're very mature in that standpoint. Now, we also are from a roads and highways and a transportation standpoint. However, those land records are used by very specific specialized groups of people. So maybe it's a DOT, or maybe it's a municipality or a county government or a state government, because those agencies are the ones, or a railroad or a utility. They are very focused and very specific in their purpose and what they're doing, and leveraging that information for. And so all of that information exists. Let's not get that wrong. You know, that
Yeah.
information all exists. Those land records are there, but what we haven't seen is as much maturity in putting them all together, stitching them into a contiguous fabric, if you will, like we have tax parcels, or what we're used to seeing from a tax parcel standpoint. So the data and information is there, and the definition from a legal standpoint is most definitely there, but it's a little behind where we are with developing digital cadastre, as we call it,
Sure.
piecing all of that information together and making a seamless digital coverage. And so that's kind of, you know, the difference, I think, in why there's some difference maybe in maturity, or where we are from an expectation standpoint.
Got it. No, absolutely. And so you're leading me down right. You're right into my next question. So well done. So like thinking about that, like all the information is there. So why has it been so difficult to map these right of way boundaries, particularly the roadway right of way boundaries at scale, and kind of pull that information together? What's the difficulty that's occurred behind that?
Sure, no, that's a great question. So if we step back and think about how our corridors, we'll call them, are places that we can go move, whether that's transportation or utilities or the like, or rail, we have to think about how those came to be. And we didn't just
Right.
overnight go, oh, I think we'll just draw a line right here, and we're going to
Right.
carve out, you know, some kind of consistent distance, and we're going to say that's where we're going to go. That's not how it happened. It happened over decades, over centuries of, maybe it was wagon trails. And to be honest, in many areas of our country, the road right of way, the rights of way, the areas that we access and travel today were maybe defined by those types of things. But largely over time, there were documents, there were legal records, there was development, there was a need, there was some kind of driver to continue developing that corridor in some direction, to connect something, to get somewhere. And so each and every time we went a little bit further, there's another document, there's another transaction, there's another piece of paper, there's another survey, there's another record. And so, as you can imagine, over centuries, which is what we're dealing with in our
Yeah.
country, that's built this land, this, you know, land in between, I like to call it, that's a lot. That's massive. That's you know, a huge amount of documentation and legal records and information. So if you think about just starting from, let's just map it all, that's a big task. Let's survey it all. Let's retrace it all. That's huge. And so generally we, you know, there's not some kind of there always has to be an economic driver, or some kind of a driver that spurs us towards doing some kind of a lift like that, some kind of an effort like that. And so really, you know, that's why it's been difficult, or why it's not been done at
Right.
scale necessarily, is it's usually put together, pieced together on a as needed basis, or as needed scale, we'll call it. So if a DOT, for instance, is extending a roadway, or they're maybe widening a roadway, or a new development has come in and there needs to be an extension, that area will be focused on. All of those records will get pulled out, researched. They'll be pieced together very intricately. The research from the beginning, historical time, retracing those boundaries will be done by surveyors. And then they're ready to go with that area, that project. But that's a very labor intensive process and
Right.
very labor
Yep.
intensive project. So that's
Yeah, it
why
goes
we
back.
haven't seen that.
Yeah, it goes back to kind of like I think I've shared this before. Like a good friend of mine, former coworker, once said, "What does GIS stand for? It doesn't stand for Geographic Information System. It stands for Get It Surveyed."
Oh,
Right?
oh,
You
makes
know,
me
so
hurt.
like, right? Because you think you're looking at reality when you look at GIS data, but it's a representation. Like we got to remember
Yes.
that once until you put people in the field to sort that out, like you are still dealing with a planning grade data set that can be used to start making decisions, but you don't want to do anything on the ground until you've done that research that you just described.
And I
Um,
and I love that you threw that out there because that truly is, there's a place for both. And
right,
as we all know, most people are pretty familiar with tax parcels anymore because they're so available in local
right,
communities. They're really a framework. They're a backbone to our communities, to a lot of the work that we do. And so it's just really, wonderful to be able to share those differences. And it's important that people understand that context, right? Because
right,
at scale, it's not at that level of detail that we see from a surveyor's perspective, but we also do need the bigger picture. We need an overarching overview of what we have and where it is. It's that location
right,
context, that science of where, that is so important for us
right,
as we, it's kind of the chicken and egg, right? Before we can get down to that minutia of detail in the surveying and engineering part, we need to understand the bigger picture and getting where we're
right,
going. No pun intended. But we,
right. Sure,
we
yeah,
need that. And so that's where it's such a wonderful, I don't look at it as conflict. I look at it as really some harmony and some good collaboration. And I really think we're moving more in that direction more and more as our digital world evolves and our opportunity evolves. We have a lot of great momentum ahead in those concepts coming together.
yeah. I really view it as a really a step toward efficiency, right? Where
Mhm.
where it used to be like you had to go out into the field to kind of figure out what you were even dealing with in the first place, right? And that would either
Right.
potentially like allow a project to proceed or kill it, right? Because you found
Yes.
something that was completely unworkable. So by having this geospatial GIS data in place to allow you to kind of identify what projects are good candidates for me and which ones are not, in advance before you ever put anybody in the field is really a great benefit to efficiency and making sure that projects can advance on a
Well,
good timeline.
and that, that's absolutely right. And, at Esri, when we think about or talk about right of way, we really look at that life cycle, from beginning to end. And
Right.
it's that it starts with the planning level of having as much
Yeah.
information available as you can at a high level to start making some of those initial decisions that will definitely save you time in the beginning. And then, as you alluded to, moving through the process, moving through that life cycle. So moving into, once you know roughly what you have to work with and where it is, then laying in other data sets and seeing what do we have for grades? What do we have for sensitivity? Maybe we have wetlands in an area that we
Yeah.
want to try to avoid, or we know we have a cost prohibitive material, maybe rock. We've got hard rock. We know it's going to take a lot of
Right.
blasting. We can start making some of those decisions at a higher level without having to be down in the weeds of exact surveying, but we know roughly that, okay, we've got some things to be wary of. And then acquisition, that's a big part of right of way also.
Right.
We might talk about that
Yeah.
later, but also safety operation and compliance. Once that facility is in, those owners and operators of that space, they have a lot of responsibility to
Yeah.
maintain
For
and,
sure.
and operate. So yeah, so many areas that information and data is so important.
For sure, for sure. So as it relates to that, like so historically and kind of like in the mapping of right of ways, roadway right of ways specifically, what have been some of the biggest technical challenges or just organizational
Mhm.
challenges for that matter, in mapping these right of ways as polygons that describe the entire area of the right of way, and how have street center lines and line files tried to fill that gap, and why are they not a great substitute when you're trying to do this sort of thing?
Great question. And that really stems back to what I said earlier about we have to keep in mind how our rights of way came to be, that they evolved over time. And so maybe initially when we started, when the rights of way were starting to be defined, maybe 45 feet was sufficient, maybe 30, maybe 33 feet, narrow, one lane, but over time we
Model T.
realized, oh,
Yeah.
that's not enough. Now we're standardizing at 66 feet wide. Oh no, maybe we're looking at a DOT corridor and we need to be 100 plus feet. So what we see then is we see this jogging, jagged, odd shape. When we look at the land in between those taxable parcels, you might look at that and scratch your head and go, what is going on? Because I can look at the aerial imagery and go, well, there's the center roughly there, or there's the road built. Why is there this weird wandering, meandering boundary around this road that is the right of way, presumably? That's why, because the acquisition has happened over time. The maybe whatever driving regulations underneath, legal regulations require, over time it was smaller and then they mandated, okay, we know we need to acquire more. So moving forward, we're going to acquire more. So that creates this jagged edge or this irregular shape. So one of the things that we've struggled with in representing, we'll call it representing those rights of way, is it's not consistent. And as human beings, we like things to be tidy and neat, and we want to make it one width. We want it to be a smooth, straight shot. It's not. That's the reality. It's just not. And that's okay, as long as we understand what we're talking about and what we're dealing with. And so another aspect of that challenge is, okay, we know where the taxable parcels generally are, roughly, representatively. But in different municipalities and different regulatory authority bodies, those are defined differently, or maybe the instrument that defined it was different. Sometimes it goes out to the center line and it's not necessarily carved back to, a width, or depending on the instrument that dedicated it differs. And so it's not clean. And so stepping purely back to, well, how do we just remove the white space? That's one approach, right? That's to subtract the white space between the taxable parcels and you have, maybe a start. But that has its challenges too. And I'm sure you'll probably touch on that as we go through this process as well.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like, and I think actually because you touched on a few things there. I think it might be good to kind of like if I feel like I could get this conversation going for like the whole rest of the hour, but I do want to give an opportunity to kind of demonstrate a little bit of kind of what Regrid has done and kind of walk through that and some of the use cases that we know that we've heard as we've been talking about this over the past year. And so we'll transition there. We'll come back to some of these questions, and obviously we'll listen for Q&A from the audience as well. And again, if you have questions, I know there's been some notes going into the chat. If you have questions, feel free to drop them into the Q&A item but at the bottom of the Zoom, and we'll work to get through all those by the end of the hour, depending on how many we might not get through them all, but we will get answers out to the folks who attend, even if it's afterwards. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to pull up a few examples here that I've been working through, Linda. And we'll kind of just talk through kind of like number one, what Regrid did, and number two, like how we feel like right-of-way starts to provide some good solutions to users who are potentially encountering some of these problems. So here I've got an example pulled up in this ArcGIS Online, where I pulled in a few parcel data and our Regrid roadway right-of-way data set. I don't have that turned on yet, because I want to do a big reveal. But as you mentioned, one of the first place we started was the space between, like the empty space between parcels where parcels don't exist. Well, we very quickly, and this example points it out really clearly, found out that there's space between that has nothing to do with a roadway right-of-way or a right-of-way of any kind. And the example here is, this is Fayette County, Texas, just north of the city of LaGrange. That's LaGrange there at the bottom. And that's the Colorado River, the non-Western Colorado River, the non-California and Colorado, and it's the Colorado River that only exists in Texas. We had to have our own. But as you can see, there's a gap there. There's a space between the parcels along that river, and nobody owns it, right? I guess the state owns it. But you can see Highway 71 kind of looping north of LaGrange, that ribbon at the bottom. So you can see there's lots of white space here. And so we were like, hey, we can grab all the white space, but then we don't want to grab the river, right? And that was one of the key challenges that we had to solve for. So we started and saying, okay, this is great. We've got good right-of-ways, and we started getting feedback from some users, and they're like, this is great, but you're missing a lot. Like, there's a lot that's not there. And we're like, what do you mean? Like, what do you understand? Because like your example that we were talking about, like the parcels go to they are coincident, right? And there's a right-of-way that runs between them. And then what we found is that there's actually roadway right-of-ways that actually run completely straight through parcels, right? So I'm going to just pop on the roadway right-of-way data here, and we'll see kind of what we're talking about. Actually, I'm going to turn it off. I'm going to turn it back on again. What I want everybody to pay attention to is kind of this area. It's everywhere, but if you focus on this particular area here, just to the south and west of this meander of the Colorado River, and where the white spaces are, you can see the white spaces here, and then it's Highway 71. And when you turn the roadway right-of-way on, there's a lot of different right-of-way areas that start to show up within the data set that you might not have known, you wouldn't have known about if you're not bringing in some sort of roadway polygonal data. You might be able to bring some street center line to what we were talking about earlier, Linda, but you're not necessarily going to gain any insights as to how much area is potentially made available by those right-of-ways. And so, as you can see here, we can click on these, and it starts to give us. Actually, yeah, that's it. It starts to give us a sense for, the length of that right-of-way, how many acres it occupies. So it actually gives you a sense of how much space is being occupied by that particular right-of-way. We've done both square feet and acreage within there. And then we've classified this with US Census data, Tiger data, to give us the road name, the road type. This is the M is designating a common name for a local road. And then we've used the Master Tiger feature class classification to kind of put some more classification on it. We are trying to ascribe this to owner, but we're taking a very conservative approach there, and really only assigning the owner when we have a parcel that actually aligns with it. So there are some instances where we are going to see that a fair number of instances currently where we don't know who that owner is. Now we're also trying to build it. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Linda. Go.
Yeah, no, and I would just add in there too that, as we look at larger areas, major highways coming down into, say, like a local residential area, just like you were showing there, perhaps maybe that was, I'm not sure what's underlying there, but just keeping in mind again those different types of rights of way, right? There's maybe just access easements that have a road in them for just local residents to use, and those may not be for public use. And those are good examples of where, there's access there. We have to be careful then about, okay, now it's time to drill in. If you were really getting ready to leverage and lay out and look at a project, what's happening there. So I love that you qualified the fact that you're taking it slow and careful with looking at ownership, looking at those uses, because when we talk about, and I'm not going to derail this too long, but I think it's important when we talk about land and land management, land administration, we talk about the bundle of sticks. And I don't know if you're familiar with this concept, but it's made up of the 3 R's: the rights, the restrictions, and the responsibilities on any given piece of land. And that's what we're talking about when we look at, when we talk about rights of way. It's not really, they're not clear cut. They're not black and white necessarily. There's all of these different documents and things that grant either those rights or maybe those restrictions or perhaps responsibilities. Rights would be an example of, maybe you have rights to extract minerals on your land. A responsibility, or might be a covenant, for instance, that's on a piece of property. And, responsibilities or restrictions could potentially be something like zoning. There's some boundaries around what you can do, some restrictions to what you can do. And so anyway, just a quick side note there of, thinking about the different ways that these, what we're kind of overarchingly calling rights of way, come to be, and why they're not easy to necessarily completely sort out and discern at that higher level. So I love that you brought that piece up, Matt.
Yeah, exactly. And thank you for providing the additional context. And yeah, you're exactly right. Just because that right of way is there doesn't mean you can necessarily use it, because we have included, not just public access, not just public access roads, but private roads as well when they're present within the data. And so we are trying to be all inclusive. You can see there's a missing gap here where this is a railroad coming through. We did our best to incorporate railroads in our initial version 1 that we've launched. we're still honing that in and still building that out. So there will be more of that being added in the near future. I'm going to go ahead and go on to my next example. I've got to share a different screen. So give me a second. Let me figure that out. Okay, so you should be seeing a different screen now. Let me navigate to that. Or not. My controls seem to be covering up what I need to see. Okay, so this is another example that we have for a right-of-way. This is actually in Portland, or just south of Portland, Oregon, in Washington County, Oregon. Again, I'm just displaying the parcels here. I chose this example specifically because you can see the intersection of Interstate 5, and this is actually Interstate 205 coming in here. And I chose this, Linda, specifically because this interchange here, the space between this interchange and this right-of-way was the source of the first roadway right-of-way solar installation in the nation, as far as I can tell. Oregon worked together, Oregon DOT worked together with Portland General Electric to place some solar panels. I'll actually put some imagery on here. You can actually see it. It's a relatively small installation. I was a little surprised that it was quite so small. But it's just a little strip of solar panels here that puts out quite a lot of energy. It powers like I think over a third of the entire energy needed to run all the lighting for this intersection, and that's in Portland, where it's quite cloudy. So I was quite impressed by that, and there's obviously a lot of room to improve that. But that's what drove me to this particular area. Again, you know, the space between is pretty easy to see, but I even in this example, I was able to find, when I turned the roadway right-of-way on, I was able to find that there are some areas within here that weren't present within, and so you can kind of see this. There's this little subdivision up here. Maybe it's condos or townhomes where there's actually a roadway right-of-way coming through here, and a couple more to the north. So again, it helps a user understand where is their roadway that is potentially accessible. I think about the use case related to installing literally the last mile of fiber optic cables. Google Fiber was in my neighborhood a couple years ago, digging like trenches along the street curbs within the right-of-way to kind of lay that fiber. And I'm sure that there was a lot of work that went into understanding, you know, where do those crews need to go? Where are they able to access? How much fiber do they need? How long are they going to be trenching? How much do they need to trench? So kind of understanding all these little idiosyncrasies of the roadway right-of-way. And then again, digging further, like you said, to figure out like where do we need to continue to explore and dig further to make sure that we are getting all the answers we need to before we put infrastructure in the ground, or even put people in the field to understand what might need to happen. So those are a couple examples that we have. I'm sure there's tons more, but I just had a couple that I wanted to share with you and with the team. And there we go.
Yeah. So
yeah, go for it.
Carrying on along your last example there, I wanted to just bring up a couple of things also on, you know, why would we want to know about that space that's available, rather, you know, generally when we think about transportation, when we think about roads, I think I saw a comment in the chat, it's linear, right? It's straight line, it's linear, but you touched on some important aspects there of understanding what land is available, maybe to support the right-of-way itself. You had a great example there, solar panels supporting maybe signalization, or maybe operations for some of the equipment that support that facility, that transportation roadway, if you will. Also, alternative uses, again, for the facilities that need to go into those areas. It's important to understand what area is available and how and can it be used, you know, for those other things. And you know, some DOTs will use that example across the country, are leveraging some of these spaces. Now, it's important to keep in mind that those rights of way are there for a purpose, right? For serving the public generally, when we talk about large highways, transportation corridors, those types of things. But sometimes they do have some excess space currently that they're not needing to leverage Maybe it's there for a
Right.
future expansion or what have you. So they can do things like beekeeping or solar arrays,
Right.
or different things, unique ways that they can use that space, put it to good work, but not necessarily compromise it permanently, or
Right.
create an issue for being able to still operate and maintain that space for that function, right? The primary function of it being a transportation corridor. So I just wanted to bring out that's, those are some of the reasons why it would be important to know, what the footprint of that area really is.
Yeah, no, and I think that's awesome, and it kind of what you were just saying. Also, I think ties into one of the questions that I've seen come into the chat. And this was one where there are two easements on the property, one for the Pacific Crest Trail and one for a public access road. And the person who's asking is saying, can you talk through what are the rights and restrictions that are associated with that right of way? Now, I think I know my answer, but I'd much rather defer to the expert, Linda. So, like, what would you advise in this particular instance, as far as like what rights are um, or restrictions might exist related to that right of way for the public access road or the Pacific Crest Trail for that matter.
Sure. Well, I'm going to take a high level answer approach to this particular
I
scenario
would have too. I
since
would
I
have
don't
too.
know the details of this whole situation, but
This
I
is
would,
not legal advice, just to be
yeah,
clear. So
disclaimer. No, but going back to that core concept of rights, restrictions, and responsibilities on our property, or the bundle of rights that's come up here in the chat. I've likened it to a bundle of sticks, that bundle of rights.
yes,
A piece of land can have many, many different rights, restrictions, and responsibilities on it concurrently, or running in the same space, even potentially. So there can be many different interests or things happening across an area, across a corridor. Maybe it's granting certain entities right, and maybe it's restricting other entities from certain activities, certain things, all happening concurrently in the same space or around or on the same land. And one thing I would mention too is a lot of times we just think about what's happening on the surface of the land, but we have to think about subsurface rights as well, and even aerial rights to a certain degree. If we think about um, things that are in the right of way, maybe it's street lighting, or maybe it's things that are maybe rising above the ground surface or below in the
right,
infrastructure sense. There are rights that are extending below the surface that also
sure,
support the use of that right of way. So, of course, what we're talking about here today doesn't touch on any of that three-dimensionality. The
right,
white space we're talking about here is just purely that representation of the surface, opportunity, if you will, or surface area. And I wanted to also maybe just pivot a little bit and mention, what would some uses for this data be, for instance? And I would throw out there any organization that's managing, maybe a DOT or a municipality or a county government that manages those rights of way, that maybe hasn't gotten to the point of getting everything mapped at that detailed level of putting that fabric together and representing that right of
right,
way, but they have the documents. And in many instances, they've even taken the steps of digitizing those. Maybe they exist as
got it.
PDFs, or they exist, maybe they need a way to index those. So this type of a data set is huge, because it gives the opportunity for those entities to have a starting point, create that index, create that ability to go get the legal document quickly and easily, maybe for internal use, maybe they face it externally, that would be up to the organization. But that's one of the ways that this data set could be very valuable to those types of organizations.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I think the person who had asked the question had followed up a little bit, and then again, I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but it seems like there might be some confusion. Like there's a right of way that's there, that's leading to a particular area, but it might be restricted for a particular use or a particular entity to use that right of way. So Linda, I think that can happen, and then that can become confusing because someone a member of the public, i.e., me, you, whoever, might think, oh, there's a right of way here, I can necessarily use it. So just the presence of a right of way doesn't mean that just anybody has right to use that particular property or that particular. They don't have that right of way themselves. Like they
Yeah.
are not the possessor of that right of way. Correct?
Yes, and I'm just trying to follow here in the chat.
Yeah, it looks like
Unofficial
they responded.
use.
That
Yep.
it's the last question in the chat. Just came in about
Yep.
3 minutes ago.
Yep. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's right. I mean, and that's where, again, I love that you all are being so proactive in framing appropriate use, because that's very
Right.
important, around this type of data, because just because there's a representation of that space, there's so much more to the story of what can be done there, how it can be used, who can use that. And I don't want to get out of order in answering questions, but while I'm thinking about it and I
Right.
saw it fly through the questions here, can right of way be abandoned essentially? And the answer to that is yes. It depends how the right of way was defined or established, what that mechanism looks like, and how that property, how those rights get reverted essentially. Do they go back to the owner? Do they, it depends how it was defined and how it was conveyed in the first place,
Right.
what happens to it when it's abandoned. But yes, there are processes for abandoning those rights of way once they're no longer needed or used, etc.
Yeah, yeah. I did see one other question come in real quickly. Like, how do we cut the right of ways? Do we cut them at county boundaries? Actually, we're cut them much smaller than county boundaries right now. That's something that we're still continuing to hone in and highlight to figure out what is the correct segmentation of right of ways. This is something we talk to a lot of different users about. DOTs, utilities, telecommunications companies, folks who are putting infrastructure in the ground or managing right of way themselves. And we didn't get a real clear answer from anybody. So we're still taking feedback. We're listening to the users. We've got one licensed customer for this product already that we're continuing to listen to and we're getting feedback from. And so that we're actually cutting it much smaller than the county boundaries. Now, we are delivering our data as low as county deliverable files. We're licensing it at the state and national level, but we do break it down into county entities. So a county or county equivalent, I should say, for our friends in Louisiana. So that's where we're at currently. Linda, I think that one of the things I want to know is you had mentioned to me briefly, and I really want you to expound on this, something you called the 4 pillars of right of way.
Mhm.
And apologies if I got that vernacular a little bit wrong, but I think that's how you described it. Can you tell me and share with everybody else, number one, what are those 4 pillars, and where does this Regrid product, our Roadway Right-of-Way product, fit in amongst those pillars? Is it part of it?
Sure.
Is it not? Where does it fit? Where does it not?
Yes, no, great question. And I kind of alluded to it at the very beginning, but I'm happy to kind of expand on that. And it's really how we think about right-of-way and right-of-way management here at Esri, for instance. We've really broken it kind of into 4 different pillars, as Matt mentioned. And that's the first pillar is mapping and inventorying. So really, you know, before you can set out to do anything further in leveraging the data and making those intelligent decisions and things like that, we have to know what we have it roughly and where it is. So that representation that we've talked about so much here this morning is very important. What does that set us up for, or what can we do once we know roughly what we have and where it is? That allows us to do better planning. So
Right.
now if we roughly know what we have and where it is, of course, at a high level, again, like I mentioned before, we can lay in different data sets. We can lay in, like I said, maybe sensitive areas like wetlands. We can lay in geology for understanding what the material we might need to construct through consists of. We can look at slopes. Are we going to be dealing with, steep slopes and or poor soil or those types of things? Once we have that area that we know we need to work in to find, and we know roughly what we want to do there, it helps us make those better decisions and saying, wow, I don't know that if we're going to expand, that we should go this direction, because we've got 3 things right now that we know are going to be adding to our costs, adding to the project time, adding to execution. So that's the planning pillar. Is once we know where, we start with the first pillar, inventorying and mapping. What do we have and where is it? Then we can start making better decisions at the planning stage. Because if we don't have all of that context and information, we might lay out a beautiful looking roadway
Right.
extension and think, man, we're in good shape. And then it goes into the next stage, which is into engineering and design. So that's where we get into the detailed surveying, legal definition of those boundaries, the engineering surveying, topography, all of that. And then the designers start looking at this and going, whoa, The costs start coming back very high, or we
Now
start
we got a
having
problem. Yeah.
now we got to rethink this. Well, it adds, of course, it adds time, it adds cost, it adds, it delays projects, things like that. So the better planning we can do on these, especially infrastructure, transportation, utility type projects is very important. Acquisition is another consideration. We know our world is becoming more and more built and congested and, more complex. And I step back to, my years as a surveyor. Many of the areas I worked in my region, it was not uncommon to see a blanket easement for a power line across a whole section or a quarter of a section. And that essentially gave the utility the right, put it wherever you need to or wherever you want to. They had that blanket right. And of course, when power was just coming through the area and whatnot, completely understandable. That, you have to think about the context. Today, we are so much more congested and so much more developed and condensed that we have to be very mindful and careful where we can go, where can we even acquire, because again, we have to go back to those rights, restrictions, and responsibilities that run with the land. And now we have to sort out as for instance, the surveyors come in and go, we go through all of that. We look at the history, we look at the titling, we look at the rights, what's there, what can be done. And so acquisition is a very lengthy and complex and detailed process on any project. And so, there's some of that path of least resistance tendency. Can we use what we already have? Can we use something that's already in existence? And that has its own implications, but it can sometimes be, provide an alternative to that lengthy process of, negotiations across many different parcels that may be involved. And then the last pillar, so that was acquisition pillar. Last pillar is safety, operation, and compliance. So, these rights of way contain a lot of facilities, contain, depending who owns, operates, maintains those spaces. For instance, our municipalities, our county governments, our state governments, there's a lot happening inside that footprint of land. And I laugh and say it's hidden in plain sight. We all use it every day. We all depend on what it brings to us. Maybe it's bringing us electricity, maybe it's bringing us water, maybe our sewer wastewater is running out through it. We don't even think about it.
Our Amazon packages. Come on, like that's
bringing our
that's
Amazon
the most
packages.
Important stuff. It's bringing FedEx, right?
Yeah, it's connecting us so importantly, but there's a lot of safety, operation, and compliance considerations inside those footprints of rights of way. And so again, important for those agencies to understand what they have, where it is, and to circle back and close on your initial question, where does this product fit? In my mind, it fits really beautifully in that inventorying and mapping, that step one. What do we have and where is it? And we need polygons, to the point of the comment that was in the chat earlier. Why do we care about polygons? Well, because that's what allows us to do analysis. A polygon, an area, shape allows us to start exploring and identifying what's in there and understanding how it's relating and interacting with everything else involved, which again is the beauty of what GIS brings, right? It's that analytical ability to take place, space, location, and information and answer things we couldn't ordinarily answer. So.
Yeah, no, thank you for that great explanation, Linda. I think you laid out a ton. And I wanted to just highlight that, like what you were highlighting there when you were talking about the acquisition pillar, of everything being congested and finding different ways and different negotiations that need to happen. Like in no small part, that was the sort of feedback that Regrid was getting from our user base related to this. I think that a lot of people know that it's been reported that the crunch point of like energy development, electric energy development in the United States in particular, is not the generation. Like we can put solar panels and wind and more gas plants and things like that, nuclear, whatever. We can do that all day. That's relatively easy. It's getting that energy from where it was generated to my house, your house, everybody who's listening in's house. Because again, running those lines, you're crossing properties. You've got to negotiate with different landowners, property owners, and that's a complicated process. And so if you can leverage already publicly available and dedicated right-of-way areas, it can kind of speed some of that regulatory approval, some of that negotiation, and so it's a key point why Regrid started looking into this at the beginning anyway.
Right.
One key question I think a lot of people ask, and again it goes back to something I mentioned earlier. Don't don't departments of transportation like have this data, at least for their state, at scale? Like, don't they have this kind of polygonal data set? I think you kind of answered this already, but I think it's good to reiterate.
So of course, we're a vast country. We have 50
Right.
states, that are managing and operating, and the maturity or level of maturity that we see across the country varies. There are DOTs that have done a very good job, and they maybe have that planning level data set built. We're seeing what I'm calling parcel mapping 2.0, and this would expand into even tax parcels too. But some of those organizations that are already mapped, to a high level, maybe that planning level, maybe they've indexed in their documents
Yeah.
that support it. They're now moving into the next step, which leverages that higher accuracy piece. And so, there's products out there. Esri's Parcel Fabric is one of them that allows for that high accuracy building of parcel fabric and capturing the survey information and the survey points and the actual measurements on the documents that dedicated and the like, and categorize. I saw a question come up in the chat about are you categorizing by type, ingress, egress, conservation, wildlife crossing, etc., which I'm assuming the answer is no from your standpoint currently.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Yeah.
That gets deeper into the weeds of understanding individual documents and how those things came to be. But again, it's that evolution. Some institutions or organizations, DOTs for instance, they may just be trying to get that a digital representation going so that they can take it to the next step and be more detailed and have that higher fidelity in their data. So yeah, it's a process.
It is, and we've been very transparent here at Regrid that we launched this product very much as a planning grade geospatial product. Now what the first question is, what does planning grade mean? And really it's that it indicates that the data are beneficial for planning type processes. That sort of inventory that you were inventory and mapping that you were talking about. It doesn't represent or replace the need for field studies, surveys, digging into the documents, understanding like what's actually being conveyed by the instrument under which the right-of-way was recorded. So it's really important that Regrid does not have a comprehensive right-of-way solution that will allow you to go put something in the ground. We don't have that. Probably never will, quite honestly. Like you'll always want to put people in the field. GIS again stands for get it surveyed. But it's a step to speed your efficiency and your efficient solutions that are coming along. I'm gonna just check the chat real quickly. I know we got a little less than 13 minutes left at this point. I want to make sure we haven't missed any questions in the chat.
Well,
you do have,
go ahead. While you're looking at that, I just want to give a shout out. Nancy's got a great kind of a summary here at the end of the chat string, summing that up. That's great. Thank you, Nancy.
Nancy Von Meyer, thank you so much. You're a friend of the show, longtime
thanks
friend
for joining
of me
us
personally. So happy that you're involved in the chat, and thank you. You're like doing the work for us. We did not plant Nancy, by the way. At least I didn't. So thank you for your participation in the webinar today. Let's see. I'm not seeing any other questions coming in. I know I've got a few others that we could potentially talk through in our final like 10, 12 minutes. Linda, can you talk to me about the difference between like a legal description, i.e. a deed recording, and how that fits in, and not necessarily the difference, but how are right-of-ways in general, whether it's quite honestly, whether it's roadway or otherwise, how are those actually recorded, and do they get digitized in a geospatial manner generally?
So great question, and there's a lot to unpack in that question. There's many different ways that these come to be, if you will. They may be in the form of an easement, which is one type of an instrument. And in those instances, again, it runs over the land with the land. It's not actually transferring the ownership of the land to a different owner. So for instance, to a DOT. Now, in some instances, that transfer does happen in fee, we call it. The title transfers, and so maybe a DOT actually owns that land, outright, and it's not just a right running with the land underneath. So, for instance, in an easement example, that would be the existing owner retains the land, pays taxes probably on the land there, and the easement runs across as a a right, then by virtue creates a bit of a restriction potentially, depending how that's all written. But again, there's many different ways. There's from a DOT standpoint, it depends what state you're in sometimes too. The regulatory part of this, I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of how these all get put in place, because there are many different instruments, ways, different laws that govern and doctrine how that gets done. But that, again, that's where those land records are critically important. Pulling the records that define and designate how that space comes to be and can be used, and fully understanding that.
Got it. I saw a question come in. This is probably more directed at me. And what sort of avenue would a user of this data take to make corrections or errors in the data if they are found? You contact us directly. We've got a really robust technical support team here at Regrid. So if we're finding errors or anything related to the data, whether it's this data or any of our Regrid data, we want to hear about it from our user base. We make it very easy. We're very highly responsive. We've got a great team that handles that, unlike any that I've ever seen before in my career, quite honestly. And is there information or attributes as to who the originating organization? There is not, because we actually originated this ourselves. This is created data from Regrid based on Regrid data, and then we brought in Tiger data and some of the NHS data, National Highway System data, to help us identify where these right-of-ways were likely present. So again, this is not recording data. It's not officially recording data like Linda was just talking about. That's the next step. But this is a step to speed users toward that ultimate decision process. So it's a great question. Thank you so much for that. I know somebody put in the chat that you can always hit us at parcels@regrid.com for more information. I'll cover that at the end as well, which we're rapidly approaching, I see. One other question that I had that I know I've heard before is Regrid capturing all the public utility easements that are associated with these right of ways? And the answer, unfortunately, at the moment is no. This is not an easement product per se. It's really dedicated to identifying the area in a polygonal form that is covered by the roadway and associated, not just the road surface itself, but the medians, the shoulders, and associated areas, so we can get a full sense of what that potential usable area would be for any particular use case. But we are not including things like public utility easements at present. That might be a road we go down to in the future, but that's probably, quite honestly, a separate product, or certainly another tier of product. It's a much as my dad would have said, it's a different kettle of fish that we need to deal with. So let me see what else. The question about conservation easements for fish and wildlife. It's something that we've looked into. It's not part of the product today, but we are aware that there's things like wildlife corridors that are utilizing information about the right-of-way to determine where to place those and where they can be placed. And so that's something there. We do have some other efforts that are related to natural processes. Some of the things like Linda was mentioning, wetlands, environmentally sensitive areas. That's a little further down, maybe a peek behind the curtain into what Regrid's future roadmap might look like. But it's not currently part of this product at the moment. So, we've got a couple minutes left. Let me see, what else do we have that we haven't
One
really
additional
covered?
question,
Yeah,
I'm
go
not
ahead,
sure
Linda.
not sure if this has been answered. When you place railroad right-of-way, will you be using and referencing valuation maps? I'm not sure that's been touched on.
Good question. So we're still working to tackle comprehensive right-of-way. I think Nancy mentioned in the chat that it's not easy. And not surprisingly, she's right. Nancy knows what she's talking about. So you might have just turned us on to another source we need to consider. So we will take a look at that, but currently we're still trying to identify really good sources for both active and potentially retired railways, because we know that some of those retired railways, I know there's been a lot of efforts nationwide to the whole Rails to Trails project, where they take old abandoned railway right-of-ways and turn them into trails, like mountain bike, hiking, you know, or just other multi-purpose trails that can bisect different areas of the country. So it is certainly something that we're continuing to look at. Let's see. So there's a question about if there are things you want to track specifically with Regrid or connect and collaborate. You can reach us at parcels@regrid.com. We'll work through that with you, and we'll work to make sure we get you what you need. And you know, we'll talk to you about, you know, what we can and cannot tailor at this particular time. We are a product company. We try to make our product scalable and supportable to a wide audience. So any sort of tailoring needs to be discussed, and we need to understand what we're getting ourselves into. So we're not really talking about pricing today. I saw a question come in on pricing. We will work with our customers who are already existing parcel customers. This is designed to be what's the word I'm looking for? A complementary product to our parcel data. Again, this is not a product that effectively creates a fully topologically correct data set, because we recognize there's roadway right-of-ways that sit on top of parcels, and there's things there are gaps within the parcel data set that aren't representative of a roadway right-of-way, like a river and a water body. So it doesn't create a topologically correct, but it is a very complementary data set for a large variety of use cases. Yeah, so I think, Linda, I think we're going to wrap it up. I hope I've gotten to most questions. They're coming in kind of fast and furious, and it gets a little nuts. If you've ever hosted a webinar before, you might know what I'm talking about. But I'll pop this last screen up as we get ready to sign off. Again, thank you for joining us today, this Regrid and Esri hosted webinar. If you've got questions for us, you can that we didn't get in the Q&A. Well, I think we'll probably have a transcript of it, so we'll work to get that out to everybody who attended. But you can always reach us at parcels@regrid.com. Please follow us on the socials, us and Esri for that matter. You know, to keep track of what we're doing. We did record this webinar. Our recording will be available probably 28 to 48 hours afterwards. It depends on how long Zoom takes to render it. Thank you, Linda, so much for joining us today. Thank you for everyone who was active in the comments in the chat to bring us great questions. I'm sure you've given us a lot to think about, and we'll continue to work to get, maybe we'll expand our documented FAQs for our customers. Linda, anything you want to share with the audience before we sign off?
No, just want to extend a thank you to you, Matt and Regrid, for having me, and for all of you who attended. Appreciate your attentiveness and your interest in this. It's an exciting space, and look forward to working with everyone as it progresses.
Absolutely. Thank you very much again, and I look forward to seeing you in San Diego back in July.